Morning folks, welcome back to the channel. Today is March 9th, 2025. We're gonna plant red potatoes today. Now, in the past, my potato experience has been rather mediocre, kind of pedestrian. Have not been pleased with my results. I've bought my potatoes historically from my local co-op. I've got organic reds, Yukon Golds, and russets, just to make sure they weren't sprayed. And I don't know if it's my cultural practices or the potatoes themselves that were winding up with pretty low yields for what I was hoping to get. But this year I went with seed potatoes from a local garden center instead. They were a lot cheaper. Those organics were, upward $2 to $3 a pound this year. In the past, they were about $2 to $2.50. And I got these seed potatoes for 65 cents a pound. So I went with 15 pounds each of red, Pontiac Red, Yukon Gold, and Kennebec, because that's what they had. And I gave a pound of each to my neighbor, so I have 14 pounds left. And today, we're gonna plant the reds. Later in the week, we're gonna plant the russets and the Yukon Golds. And yeah, probably today I'll cut those into pieces. I'll let them cure over. But I want to get the reds in the ground today. So let me show you what we got set up. So as you can see, I have it all laid out here. I'm going to use 2 beds on the northern edge of the garden. That's the garlic. And this bed has 46 pieces. This bed has 44 pieces. Now, when I called to sort of place my order for pickup, they sectioned these out for me in paper bags, so each bag had 5 pounds. So they picked the potatoes, I didn't. I noticed when I got them home and I emptied them, I had most of the potatoes were pretty good size. This is smaller than a baseball, larger than a large egg. I'm not gonna break that down. Probably about 90 grams maybe. And they are starting to chit a little bit, not significantly, but they're easier to move outside when they're not like chitted out to about, that half inch where you're gonna wind up knocking them off if you're not careful. These, I'm absolutely fine with putting them in the ground at that level of growth. What I noticed when I brought them home and emptied them, getting back to that little tale, is that a handful of them were rather small too. This is probably around golf ball size, maybe even just slightly under. I don't know how that's going to perform. From what I've read in my experience, you kind of want them maybe a little bigger than this, but if you have them, real big monsters, you want to break those down into sizes that are probably closer to this, or even a little smaller, but not too much bigger necessarily. So to sort of experiment with what I think is going to happen, I'm guessing my yields on those are going to be much lower. This bed on the right hand side, all the potatoes in there are more of the standard seed potato size that you get, somewhere between, like I said, slightly smaller than a baseball, slightly bigger than a large egg. This bed, for the most part, the front side of it has small, and then I have a handful of more standard seed potato sizes. And then at the end, I've got cut pieces. Now, I actually cut these pieces this morning. I did not, usually I cure them over for a couple days, but patience is getting the best of me, and I want to try to capitalize on the weather that we've got coming up as much as possible. Maybe it's a little premature. I have read that, you can cut and plant the same day without having an issue. So this is actually going to teach me that as well. If for some reason this back half of the bed, back quarter of the bed doesn't perform, maybe it's because I, cut and should have cured for a day or two, which I'm going to do for the the Kennebec and the Yukon Golds inside. But for these, I just wanted to get them in the ground. Just wanted to give myself this little project today. So that's why I'm rolling with it as such. Now, one thing I'm not doing is I'm not breaking off chits. Some people will say have no more than 1 to 2 chits per potato, because each chit is going to throw up a shoot system, and in doing so, it's going to get really crowded and you'll have a lot of small potatoes. I don't know the research on that specifically, but my random thought on that is I've had storage potatoes. Well, hey, a couple days ago, you saw me plant my blue potatoes. Now, those were sitting in storage for a long time and not great temperatures to where it was a bit too warm for them. So they sprouted, chits up to 8-12 inches long. And then I broke them off. And then they regrew. And I broke them off again. And they regrew again. So my thought is, if I'm breaking these chits off to plant to leave no more than 1 or 2, wouldn't the ones that I broke off just continue to grow underground, creating the same competition? Does it really matter if I break them off ahead of time? I don't know. Maybe you have to literally take a paring knife and cut them out if you just don't want to have 1 or 2. But that's kind of my long explanation as to why I'm not going to bother breaking chits off. I'm just going to stick these things in the ground and roll with what I've got. Now, like I said, I've got 14 pounds, and I want to know what my conversion is going to be. My goal, in a perfect world, I'd get about 10 pounds per pound. I'd be happy with 8. I'd be very unhappy with 6 or less. So if I can get to that 8+ range, I'll think that I did something really well. I haven't hit that the last 3 years. I got 7 pounds my first year, and then 5 to 6 the last 2. Like I said, not good years. I also struggle with the Colorado potato beetle, and they defoliate the plant pretty quickly here. I aggressively get out and try to peel them off as quickly as I can, but 2 years ago I was late to the game, and that was my worst year. Last year I was quicker to the game, and my yields were better. So that is the long tail of my potatoes and what I'm doing this year. Let's get planting. So this garden is fully no dig, no till. I've been spending the last 4 years just putting organic matter down on the soil, letting it break down. Sometimes finished compost, sometimes not. The only thing that's been trucked in here has been my wood chips. Everything else is deciduous leaf fall or cut grass from the field, homemade compost, semi-finished homemade compost. But right now what I've got on top of my native red clay, which is pretty tough to work in, is that's about 5 inches that I can plant these things down into before I actually hit that really sticky, gritty red clay. And I think that's a pretty good depth for these potatoes. So the fun part about no dig for me is I didn't have to till anything, and all I've got to do to plant in this is pull this aside and pop in that potato, cover up, and then I'm done. And that's how I plant this potato. And I'm gonna do 89 more, and then I can call my red potato planting done, with the exception of any watering that I've got to do. So yeah, let's rock and roll. A note to my future self: the first 14 in this bed to my left are the really micro-sized potatoes. So I want to remember that, so when I'm digging them out when they grow, I can get a good idea of how much yield you can get from a pretty small potato. Not doing a mathematical conversion of pounds because I don't know what they weigh, but more just the eye test. What is a really small potato yield? And we are planted. So I think by Wednesday, these next 4 beds, 1, 2, 3, and 4, are going to have the Kennebecs and the Yukon Gold. Yeah, 2 beds for each. those potatoes, when I took them out of the bags, had much bigger pieces, so I'm gonna have to break those into smaller ones, but I'd still like to kind of hit that 80 to 90 total. The beds seem to fit 40 to 45 pretty well, at about a square foot each in space. So I think my spacing on these, it's about 1 foot and maybe somewhere between 1 foot and 16 inches across. And I think that spacing is gonna be just fine to get some yield out of that. So the red potatoes are now in, and it was important to me when looking at the forecast to get the potatoes in now, because as a defined cool season crop, the sweet spot seems to be for the best growth to be somewhere between 68 and 76 degrees. And here in the Piedmont region of North Carolina, our weather is really yo-yo. It's up, down, and we can have a really short spring to where it gets really hot quickly after the cold snaps kind of late sometimes, or we can have a really extended spring. But when I look at the 15-day forecast right now, we seem to be in a zone of low 60s to mid to high 70s, with overnights anywhere between high 30s to high 40s. And I figure I should probably take advantage of that, being that this is probably somewhere between 85 and 100-day crop, because 85 to 100 days puts us into, what's that, early June, so a full April, full May, full June, better part of March. So if I can take these to mid-June last year, or 2 years ago, was really mild. Mid-June last year was a little warmer. It can get to, those mid-80s really easily in mid-June here, and that's not ideal for the potato growth here. And at that point, with our potato beetle coming out in late April, they seem to really like that temperature pretty well. They do some damage around that temperature here. So I'm trying to get ahead of that right now by planting now, as opposed to later in March when the temperatures are more established warm. So we'll see what happens. I'm anticipating good things this year, and if nothing else, even if I have a really terrible, by my definitions, yield on the potatoes, at 65 cents a pound purchase, I mean, what's that divided by 5? 12.5 cents. So if I get a 5-pound conversion, 12.5 cents a pound on edible potatoes, that's pretty solid. Now, when I was buying the organic potatoes at a 5-pound conversion on, $2.50 a pound, that's a 50 cents a pound yield. That's not good. That's too expensive for the time and the effort it takes. I would rather just plant more sweet potatoes at that point. They store better for me, and one sweet potato with a really exceptional vining system can give me 50 to 75 slips. That's a bed and a half worth of production for nothing, because that's a sweet potato that I saved from prior year, because they store over the winter much better for me than white potatoes do. So I like the idea of going with the less expensive seed potato, like I said, because I can yield much better for the money. So that's all I got going for today as far as potato planting goes. Like I said, my Yukon Golds and Kennebecks will get put in later in the week. And in late March, I'll do another garden tour. And I'm not necessarily anticipating seeing the potatoes cracking the surface at that point, except maybe the blue ones. Since we did those about a week ago, I'm anticipating seeing some growth out of that. But by that point, we'll have some other things planted, like the kale will be transplanted, the mustard will be transplanted, maybe some broccoli as well. The garlic will still be growing well. I'm anticipating the onions in the bed to the outside of the fence that we did a couple weeks ago. Actually, probably almost a month ago. I'm anticipating seeing a little bit of growth out of that, if we're going to get any. The blackberries are breaking dormancy, at least the Primark Freedoms are. I saw a couple of flowers on strawberries when I was doing some weeding around those beds, so I'm anticipating being able to show something there as well. And then I'll probably show some seed starting things. I did my seed starting for tomatoes, and I did a video on my peppers, and both of those are starting to break. The poblanos haven't broke yet, but the YOLO Wonders did, and my tomatoes have as well. So it's coming to that time where we're catching enough temperature to where things can get warm outside and start germinating, since I don't do germination inside. And yeah, this is fun time in the spring. So I thank you all for watching. Take care. We'll see you in the next one.